The Biden administration took another look at this after the WHO fell down on the job. That guy, Peter Daszak, was on the committee. They went over to China. They didn't see anything. They didn't push back. They were followed around by Chinese miners the whole time. Minders, not miners. That would be weird. And so then they came back with this baloney conclusion. And then the Biden administration said, all right, we're going to take a closer look. You said it was a waste of time what they did. Our own intel communities came out and said, inconclusive. It's inconclusive whether it was a lab leak or his natural origins. And you said the whole review was doomed to fail. So do we put any stock whatsoever in what the Biden administration told us, inconclusive about how it started?
You know, tragically, it seems that the Biden administration has decided to throw its hands up, that they don't have any real plan that I can tell to try to figure out how he got into this mess. They won't release any of the intelligence that they're sitting on. They won't press the Chinese government to open up any of its books or open up the labs for any real investigation. They have this, like, if you think about it, horrendously and obviously weak alibi that they want China to cooperate with the World Health Organization when they know, and they'll tell you when the cameras are off, that that's never going to happen. And, you know, we wasted a year not looking for the coronavirus origins because people thought the lab leak was a Trump idea and they didn't want to get behind a Trump idea. So all the scientists who were the closest friends of the lab, like Peter Daszak, you just mentioned, called it a conspiracy theory. And we went through a year of that. And then finally, the Biden administration came in and they said, no, it's not a conspiracy. Actually, some in our own intelligence community think it was the lab, and we're going to look into it. And they promised to look into it. And all of a sudden, you couldn't call it a conspiracy theory because that would mean that Joe Biden would have to be in on the conspiracy. It doesn't make any sense, right? So now there was some hope. And now after they did it, what we found out is that they didn't really look. Okay. And, you know, it's like the drunk person searching for their keys under the streetlight. And the cop says, why are you searching for your keys under the streetlight? Oh, the light's much better here. You know, and what the intelligence community did essentially was they looked inside their own files and they didn't look anywhere else. They didn't look at the EcoHealth Alliance. They didn't interview anybody. They didn't talk to Robert Redfield, who was the head of the CDC, and a virologist who said it probably came from the lab. And then they put him in like the witness protection program or something. I haven't seen that guy in months. And they didn't talk to Matthew Pottinger, who was leading the investigation at the time for the Trump. They didn't care. So they looked at their own files. And then the funniest thing, I mean, saddest thing, but kind of funny, was that they determined they couldn't even read their own files. Our vaunted $80 billion intelligence agency couldn't understand they didn't have any Chinese speaking, you know, scientists who could sort through the data. So they just said, oh, well, we're never going to figure it out. And the Biden team was like, okay, I guess we'll never figure it out. And that's an abdication of their fiduciary responsibility to keep us safe, to protect us, you know. And what, you know, just what you mentioned today, we can get into this a little bit more, this USAID Predict program. Basically what they announced is our own government announced that they're going to pour another $125 million of U.S. taxpayer money into hunting viruses, including SARS-CoV-2 related viruses all over the world for the next 10 years with no additional safeguards, no additional scrutiny, no accountability, no oversight, and no idea how we got into this mess. In other words, we don't know, right? For all your listeners out there who are about to tweet at me, we don't know how the virus originated. We don't know if it was a lab. We don't know if it was natural spillover, but we got to check out both theories. All I'm saying is we can't rule out the labs. We need to check it out. And we should probably do that before we spend another $125 million on expanding this research, because that's crazy.
It is crazy. And this organization, I mean, who's gonna be watching them to make sure that there isn't a leak or that it isn't mishandled, or I don't know, that you don't have a guy like Peter Daszak in there doing stuff and then misleading us, because that's the other thing that's happened today is that guy, Peter Daszak, who runs EcoHealth Alliance, which is a taxpayer funded organization. You and I are paying for them, who seems to be behind every corner in this entire story. He's the guy who went over to China and he was like, there's nothing to see here. It's definitely not a lab leak. The Chinese are great. Meanwhile, we know from all the reporting we've seen over the past year or so that his organization was getting tons of taxpayer money, including approved by Fauci's organization, that to perform what very much looks like gain of function research. He's denying it, but research that takes viruses, back coronaviruses, and makes them more infective toward humans. And now there's a push to get him out of that organization for having misled us over and over.
And continues to mislead us. It's really important what you're talking about, Megyn. And just for all your listeners out there who aren't immediately familiar with who Peter Daszak is, he's this guy who runs this thing called the EcoHealth Alliance. It's a nonprofit. They take money from the U.S. government. They take money from the Chinese government, actually. And they work to collect viruses all over the wild and bring them back to a bunch of labs and play around with them to see what's what. And when they find a really dangerous one, they're like, "Ooh, let's study that one." And they were doing this in Wuhan, okay? And we don't know if that led to the virus outbreak in Wuhan, but they were doing bat coronavirus research that made it more infectious to humans in the same city where the bat coronavirus pandemic broke out. So it stands to reason we should probably check it out. And Peter Daszak has been at the forefront of telling us not to check it out for a year and a half. Now, a couple things changed recently, really importantly, since the last time we spoke, Megyn. One was that, The Intercept published these documents from Peter Daszak's EcoHealth Alliance, which said that they asked the U.S. government, part of the U.S. government called DARPA, for money to do bat coronavirus research that was very specific. And this is a little technical, but it's really important. They asked DARPA to fund them to put a furin cleavage site on the protein of
Can you say that one more time? Say furin cleavage. Explain, because most people don't know.
Furin cleavage site means that they took the bat coronavirus and they added a part of it that made it more infectious to humans. And that's what they wanted to do. And now we have a bat coronavirus that's more infectious to humans because it has what? Guess what? A furin cleavage site. Anyway, it's the same exact thing. And if that's not a smoking gun, it's about as close as we're going to get. Okay. In other words,
can we just break that down though? Because look, speaking of the Intercept, they reported a couple of months ago, or maybe a month ago, that Peter Daszak's group, EcoHealth Alliance, had applied to Fauci's group and the oversight group for a grant to do this, what looks like gain of function research. Fauci denies it, but all these scientists have come out and said that was gain of function research that Peter Daszak wanted to do, and that they did get the money. That they did get the money. And now today there's another report saying Daszak went to effectively the Pentagon and said, "I would like a grant from you to do gain of function research," and it was denied. I think it was
that's the DARPA one.
That was okay. So there's two separate ones. That was in 2018. Sure. But so he did get money from Fauci and Fauci's organization to do this dicey coronavirus research. And then he also went to the Pentagon and made very explicit, "I want to do gain of function research on bat coronaviruses." But the Pentagon said, "Dude, no, that's way too dangerous."
Right. And, when the Pentagon says the research is too dangerous, you might want to think about it twice. But the reason that they were doing all this research in China, as you remember, is that the Obama administration banned this type of research. And then in the early part of the Trump administration, a team led by people, including Anthony Fauci, turned it back on. Okay. And they built an oversight mechanism for gain of function research. And then they classified all the risky research as not gain of function. In other words, they built an oversight system, and then they built a loophole, and then they drove through the loophole and bragged about it to the world. And so you can get caught up in this semantic debate over what's gain of function research or what's not gain of function research. But the point is, they knew they were doing risky research, and they knew they were doing them in Chinese labs that had bad safety standards. And then when the bat coronavirus popped up next to the labs, they said, "How dare you look at the labs? Don't you dare look at the labs. We can't even talk about the labs."
But why do you think that the report that just broke about Daszak's group seeking to do gain of function research and getting funding from our Pentagon to the tune of $14 million in March of 2018, and then he was denied? Why do we care so much about that when we already know he got money from Fauci's group to do what appeared to be gain of function research in connection with the Wuhan lab, separate and apart from that Pentagon grant?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Two reasons. One is because this particular proposal was so specific that if it had been funded, it would have created a virus that has the same exact weird characteristic that the SARS coronavirus has. In other words, they were proposing to build something that looks almost exactly like what the SARS coronavirus ended up being. Mm-hmm. And if that's a total coincidence, that's the craziest coincidence in the history of the world, that they were proposing a specific change to bat coronaviruses, and then were denied. And then somehow a bat coronavirus pops up in Wuhan, where they're collaborating with that exact characteristic, the same exact one.